Welcome to The Treatment Plan, a podcast about how healthcare really works, from weight loss and patient care to the systems and incentives behind it all. Hosted by Jack Usher and David Usher, MD. So in that vein, content begets more content, as they say in the biz. I don't know who says that, but
you do.
It seems true. So you posted this, and we'll link the post in the show notes for people who haven't seen it, but we're looking at it on the screen, which is about obesity is primarily driven by excess carbohydrate consumption. We talked about this on the last episode, and we say that glucose is the only biologically active carbohydrate, and that they're not an essential. It's not an essential nutrient to consume, unlike protein and fat. And every gram of carb you eat gets converted into glucose anyway. And Dad has seen this in his practice every day with people who are obese, trying to lose weight, trying to get healthier, and they feel better, often within days. Even if they don't lose that much weight in a short term, they feel better almost instantly. And so we put this out on LinkedIn, and people had a lot to say about it. And there was, like I said, over 100 comments, but there were some more interesting takes, some outrage, and everything in between. So here, we're just going to jump into some of these more interesting comments. And again, this is all meant to be, we're taking these comments in good faith, that they're constructive, that they're, coming from the right place, that we're all trying to figure this out. So I grouped this first set of comments. We've got 4 here, that you're attracting some of the ire of the RDs and LDs and the CDEs in the comments, according to Steve here. They had some things to say, so let's read some of these, and then we'll get your response. So diet is more complicated. Fiber and micronutrients. So there's a number of comments related to these. I took a screenshot of just some of them that were a little more substantive. This is misleading. Health is much more complicated than that. Carbs include fruits, vegetables, and whole grains that do provide essential nutrients you cannot all get from meat, mainly fiber. Limiting carbs and having a healthy, balanced diet go hand in hand. Saying we don't need to eat carbs because it's not essential implies we do not need fiber, and a wide variety of micronutrients and other antioxidants that have been scientifically proven for decades to support desirable health outcomes. And some of these are very similar. I don't know where to begin. Complex carbohydrates are the only source of fiber, and these vitamins and minerals. With the exception of fruit, complex carbs are also a good source of protein. In the late 70s, the liquid protein diet was popular. No carbohydrate. Many deaths resulted. When discussing carbohydrate, it is imperative to distinguish between complex carbs and simple carbs. That said, it's important to stay within the RDA for carbohydrate. Those with metabolic syndrome are often advised to stay closer to the lower end of the carb RDA. Without carbohydrate, hypoglycemia and fatigue are sure to result during physical activity. And so, yeah, I think you get the theme here. Sorry, but it's much more complicated than that. Most people, it's calories in versus calories out. Please do deeper research, as you are supposedly qualified to read top journals, or do less research and apply for a job under RFK Jr. So I think you get the theme of this objection to what you said here.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? And let's be clear. We have addressed some of this before in previous conversations, but we'll go over the ground again, if necessary.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear these comments, and it really is contextual. When you look at who they come from, like, I don't think any of the commenters on there, and I may be wrong, but I don't think any of them had an MD behind their name. It was PhDs and registered dietitians. But when you're in the exam room seeing a patient who's obviously got a number of physical complaints, so maybe it's an obesity patient that we're seeing for medical weight loss, whatever it is that the public has been told and they've been told to do. Very many of our patients for weight loss have been through all kinds of various things, versions of Mediterranean diet, eat less, move more, calories in, calories out, so on and so forth. None of those is inherently bad advice. But when you've got somebody who's 100 pounds overweight, you need something that works, and you need something that's simple and something they can get behind and believe in and understand, right? One of the comments was that I remember seeing was something like glucose is the only metabolically active carbohydrate, question mark. Like they were like the writer was just incredulous at my making this statement. And I would say, I hate to say it, given the context, but prove me wrong. Find me any evidence anywhere that any other carbohydrate is metabolically active in the sense of as an energy source, right? Particularly an essential energy source. As I say to my patients, there's a little bit of tissue in your brain, a little bit in your eyes, and a little bit in your kidneys that are obligated to burn glucose. And that's so essential that your body's making its own in the liver, right?
Well, there's a good comment about this, to your point. There was some debate about this. Some people were quite incredulous, a little nasty about this particular point, and this line about glucose being the only active form of carbohydrate in the body. And so I left those out because they weren't particularly constructive. But this person actually left a thoughtful comment, and it says, "Yeah, I think you're right to call it carbs. It's not essential. The liver makes all the glucose body ever needs. Da 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 da." And then where I'd add nuance is lumping everything together: glucose, fructose, fiber, resistant starch. They're not the same thing biochemically. Fructose, in particular, bypasses PFK and goes straight into the liver, driving DNL and ceramides, which is very different to how glucose from, say, a boiled potato is handled. Carbs aren't the only thing driving insulin resistance. Also, ethanol, PUFA peroxides, BCAA intermediates like HIB3, which the same pathways when flux exceeds mitochondrial capacity. The real issue, she goes on to say, isn't the carbs in isolation. It's hyperinsulinemia and hepatic overload. This explains why some people get sick on high carb diets, while others tolerate them better. It comes down to liver fat, insulin dynamics, mitochondrial throughput, not just a carb tally.
Beautiful. That's more than I'll ever know about what she just said. But that's entirely true. Ethanol is a biggie. But the bottom line is, I'm just a humble physician here, but in my experience, the vast number of patients that I'm seeing are not toxic from eating seed oils or overdosing on polyunsaturated fats, or maybe ethanol. I have a lot of people who we see who, when we put them on their weight loss diet, by eliminating carbs, we also, one of the other rules is we're going to get rid of alcohol as well, at least while you're trying to lose weight, because that's a real slower downer, if you will. But I saw a guy the other day who started out at 430 pounds. He still drinks probably about 4 beers a day, but he's eliminated all of those junky carbs. He eats a couple of servings of low starch vegetables every day, and then the rest is protein and fat. And he's now down under 300 pounds in just a year.
Wow. Must look like a different guy.
13 months, he does. Completely different, and still drinks like 3 or 4 beers a day. Which is just amazing to me. But he's happy. He feels great, and is obviously all of his metabolic parameters are improving. So, it's like, literally low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit is the problem with all of this is by keeping it, I think, my experience, I think the evidence would back this up, is that for the vast majority of people, the solution is really simple. That's why we have, if you figure again, 340 million people in this country and a 75% overweight and obesity problem, all those people aren't overdoing alcohol. They're just eating. They've done studies on this. The Americans changed their diet in response to governmental recommendations for a low-fat diet 50 years ago. And what happened? We had an obesity epidemic. Okay, well, that was obviously not the approach to take. And what happened was, and that's been studied as well, is people they kept their fat and protein about the same, and they just ate more carbs. But by definition, it became a low-fat diet because the percentage of fat went down. And if you give people numbers and ask them to start doing math, well, you need 30 grams of protein twice a day, and no more than 60 grams of fat twice a day, and ask them to do the math, they just don't do it. It's too complicated, right? What I have found to be very effective is the simple, again, all the credit in the world to Eric Westman at Duke University, no starch, no sugar diet. Just keep it really simple for people. There's evidence all over the place to support that. And I have, I've been doing this about 20 years with my patients now, and I can, patient after patient after patient, I have 5 or 6 or 7 providers who are doing this, working within our clinic, basically the same model, and it just keeps drawing in more and more patients. And the people, we don't advertise. These are just people who, by word of mouth, they see the success and how well others feel, and they just want to be part of it. So they will kind of jump into our program and start to see the benefits as well. And there's nothing magical about it. It's just very, very, very clear communication about what the majority of the problem is for the majority of the people.
Yes. I had an experience or a thought as I was reading some of these comments too, where the central claim of your post, or the central claim of our conversation, obviously the post was just basically ripped right from that, is obesity is primarily driven by excess carbohydrate consumption. That is the central claim of that is your central claim. So that's obesity. That's a chronic disease. That's a condition. We're not saying healthy people are plagued by carbohydrates necessarily. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying obesity. So we're talking about people who are obese. We're not talking about what is the optimized diet and routine for a person XYZ. It's if you are obese, what is that primarily driven? It might not necessarily, but be hard pressed to probably find somebody who doesn't fall into this camp, is primarily driven by an excess carbohydrate consumption. Not necessarily the carbohydrate, any carbohydrate consumption, excess carbohydrate consumption. But it feels like a lot of these comments, I mean, many of them are actually, like I said, very positive. But a lot of these who are being critical or kind of attacking you're attacking your thesis, they seem to miss that a little bit. And it's like that. Well, it's all actually a lot more complicated than that, and blah blah blah. And you need this and that, and it's, again, we covered this a little bit last time, but there's a difference between what is the optimized diet and routine for a person like me, a 25-year-old, 175-pound, 6-foot dude with no health, who works out, versus somebody who is obese, which is who we were talking about in the post.
If you're trying to treat obesity, I wouldn't try to treat obesity in your case, right? You work out a lot, fit, and metabolically healthy. And the problem is, part of the problem has been that when they came out with dietary guidelines for Americans, the federal government and the working group committee or whatever of mostly food industry people, but some science represented there, they're coming out with dietary guidelines for Americans, assuming they're healthy, right? Like, what is the federal government's approach to actively managing obesity? And that's what is complex, and why it has to be the approach has to be simple, because people live in very complex environments. They're bombarded by information from who knows where, across how many social media platforms, internet, television, friends, family, and everybody has an opinion about this. And
It's endless. It's
it's
bottomless.
endless. Yeah. And the reason everybody has an opinion is because nobody seems to want to talk about some basic, simple facts, and really just hammer that. And so, that's what we do. We just hammer what are basic, simple facts. So I have yet to meet somebody who comes in and says, yeah, I got overweight because I just kept eating too many hamburgers. It's never that. It's not, oh, I eat
And to be clear, that would be hamburgers without the bun
hamburgers off
and
the
the
bun.
fries
Yeah.
on
Right.
and the
Right.
fries and the
Yeah.
beer
With
to go
nothing
along
else in my diet. Right.
with it. Yeah.
I haven't ever met somebody who's been a lifelong carnivore who is overweight. I haven't met anybody who's a lifelong carnivore, honestly. But we start at a very young age, selling people on the notion of, I mean, again, you can just start at Gerber baby food. Not to cite a company, but there you go. I mean, but that's reality. That's when we fed our kids growing up. It's like, oh, here's this and here's that, and these little sticks, and aren't those cute? And here's some Cheerios, and all these things that, sugar laden stuff. Oh, look, he's 1 year old. We give him his first piece of birthday cake, and it's like half the cake, and they're stuffing it in and rubbing their face in it. And oh, it's so cute. And this is not to invalidate all of that experience with people. They love it. It's great. It's some people, it's their, what do you call it? Love language, right? Food. Grandma bakes this, and we go over there, and this is what we do. It's also complex. That when you have somebody who's got a weight problem and is unhealthy because of that, or maybe they're not maybe they're just overweight. Maybe they're not overweight yet. They just have pre-diabetes and high blood pressure and maybe sleep apnea, which are being managed, but now they're taking drugs to manage what really is just a carbohydrate excess in the diet. If they cut their carbs down, all that stuff goes away.
Yeah, what I think about actually when you're talking about this is something I've experienced too. like you mentioned, I do like to work out, and especially as it relates to strength training, there's a very analogous situation that's going on where it just feels like you have endless information out there about what you should do to get stronger or get jacked or put on strength and size, blah blah blah. But what you come back to is, and shout out to the guys at Starting Strength who really kind of solidified this for me. It's like you're talking to most people. Most people are like, 45 years old, and they just want to not be as out of shape as they are. And they've probably never lifted weights in their life, or they lifted in high school and it's been 30 years. And all they need to do is go in and do squat, bench, and deadlift 3 times a week, 3 sets of 5. They do that for 6 months, and they'll be in the best shape of their lives.
Right.
You don't need to worry about and then eat enough protein.
Right.
Eat enough protein and calories to basically make you feel good enough in the gym to lift the weights. And that's it. You can have all this discussion about carb timing and the optimal. I mean, I can't even go into it because it just triggers me. But it's just like, or you can just go in and lift the weight and eat some steak, and you will be 90% of the way there. We can worry about 10% once you're squatting double body weight and repping out chin ups, and you really just want to push it as far as you can go. Then you can introduce your complexity and your whatever. But it's the same exact thing, and you see it. I see it here too. It's just like, oh, but there's this biochemical and this micronutrient that you're missing and blah blah blah. And it's like you're focusing on what would be perfect on paper versus what is effective for the patient or for the person that's just trying to make a huge improvement with a simple protocol.
Yeah, it's like when we prescribe, let's say blood pressure drugs, right? You prescribe kind of a low dose or a moderate dose. 90% of the benefit you're going to get from that drug is at that dose. Cranking up more of that same drug really doesn't get you but marginal benefit. Add another drug, and And now you got another drug that's giving you a lot of benefit at a low dose. So, right, you throw on strength training with a low carb diet, and now you've got a real combination for, and that's I'm not saying carnivore diet. I'm just saying, keep your carbs down and allow your insulin levels to flatten. And when you do that, you will start tapping into those fat stores. I just saw a video of Dr. Steve Finney. Steve is a PhD scientist he's got to be mid-70s. I don't know. He looks great, but he's still working, he's been doing low-carb ketogenic diet, well-formulated ketogenic diet studies for got to be 50 years probably. And he has been, and there are things we've just known. I mean, there's been incredible evidence for this for years, but taking, first of all, studies where you take people and lock them up and absolutely control what they eat so they're eating exactly what they say they're eating, very hard and very expensive to do. So, but he's done several of these studies with elite athletes.
The perfect candidate, really,
yeah,
for
right?
something like that. It's your livelihood to do this.
Like elite Tour de France level bicyclists. And stick them in a metabolic ward for 4 weeks and feed them a very low carb ketogenic diet and watch their performance, measure their performance, their VO2 max, all those things. And they all come out feeling great and maybe outperform and get the best performances of their lives. And but it takes a period of time to get to that point, and it's but there's a time like 4 to 8 weeks where you have to get keto adapted or fat adapted. Your metabolism will completely shift to running optimally on fat as opposed to carbohydrates. And he's done studies on like ultra marathoners, people that run, just crazy, like 100 miles a day kind of road races. Done the same thing, and their performances do at least as well. Many of them improve, and then they're not having to slam Gatorade and glucose tabs and all these things. They just run on their body fat, which intuitively to me makes sense. 100,000 years ago, we didn't have any of what we have now, really, in the fruits and vegetables realm. That just didn't exist. This is all stuff that's been farmed and crossbred. Yeah, which is that genetically modified? Well, I guess in a sense. Bred to be what they are: big red juicy apples and tomatoes and these cauliflower and broccoli. None of that stuff exists in nature. And you'd waste your life trying to find enough nutrition to get those every day, or you just go out and kill a big critter and you can eat on that for days, weeks, or months.
That's true. And this discussion of having somebody in a metabolic ward and controlling what they're eating actually reminds me of another comment that we got from an outraged dietitian over here. We're looking at from this guy, and again, we're not trying to dunk on anybody, but
no, for sure,
we're I'm sure somebody could go find these comments and find out who said them, but we won't read their name or anything. But this registered dietitian, MSRDLD, MVP, GLP, how many more times must we be subjected to individuals leveraging the weight of their medical credentials to make outlandish statements? How many more times must we read controversial hot takes rooted in personal anecdote rather than a holistic understanding of decades of outcomes data? Yeah, I'm a dietitian. I'm going to tell people to eat more vegetables. Devil's advocates like to nitpick observational data, but unless you find a couple thousand people willing to let you control every calorie they eat for a decade, it's very difficult and expensive to do long-term nutrition studies without observational data. When outcomes data is consistent throughout decades and decades of similar research, we begin to understand that the presumptions we make are likely accurate. Presumptions such as people who eat more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, and lower quantities of red or processed meat experience lower incidences of disease and even mortality. Not every person on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok have somehow gained an insight that 100 years of nutrition research missed. People post this stuff to farm engagement.
Yeah, this is.
So what I find interesting Before you go, what I find interesting is he says it's very difficult and expensive to do long-term nutrition studies without observational data. And when outcomes data is consistent throughout decades and decades, we begin to understand that the presumptions we make are likely accurate. Wait, that doesn't follow, does it? It's difficult and expensive to do long-term nutrition studies without observational data, but outcomes data is consistent, and therefore we can understand that the presumptions are accurate.
I'm not entirely clear what the statement is actually trying to say. You can yes, dietary. I completely agree with that. What I would say is, again, this gets back to the population we treat. People don't come into us to help them lose weight because we promise them something in an advertisement on a billboard and LinkedIn or wherever. The people we see come in because their friends and family members have had enormous results. Because it's a doctor-patient relationship, we don't splash their data all over the place and talk about it. We're not a research institution. I can tell you I've seen thousands and thousands of patients over the years, and we only get more and more precisely because of the outcomes we do get. And we do track their labs. We can tell you, the drops that people see in hemoglobin A1C and the drops they see in triglycerides and blood pressure meds. And, people were taking off of numerous drugs for various things. Their gout goes away. I can talk about this all day. But
we have a comment about that too. We'll get to that.
These health concerns just get better. People feel better. They lose their weight, and we track them. Are there some people who just weren't ready to do any kind of program? Yeah, that we always bump into that. Somebody who starts and they never really start. Well, I just had a really tough month and I didn't really do the eating strategy, and and that's okay. And that's humanity. Again, that's life. That's the complexity of the thing.
Speaking of which, we can add to this conversation. But this exact fact is brought up by another outraged sort of, I'm not sure what's happening here, commenter. It looks like she is a diabetes weight management consultant or dietitian or something. Getting to this exact point about there's a complex environment, complex life going on here. And I guess the context here, she was tagged by somebody she probably knows to respond or something. And she goes, I don't think engaging in this debate moves anything forward, but then continues to engage in the debate. I work directly with weight management, blah, 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 obesity care. I've seen the harm this messaging causes, the harm. When physicians spend 6 to 12 months in one-on-one counseling with the same patient, they begin to understand the complexity, which is exactly what you do.
That's our business
Until
model,
then, the conversation often goes in circles. My work focuses on helping patients heal their relationship with food, incorporating the whole fruits, vegetables, and whole grains in sustainable ways. The results are consistent. Improved A1C, stable blood sugars, reduced cholesterol. Restrictive cut-all-carbs approaches may lead to rapid A1C and weight loss, but they often overlook critical factors: carbohydrate functionality, vitamins, minerals, fiber, microbiome health, and cortisol balance, especially important for women of 30. These nuances are essential for long-term health outcomes. My focus is on patient outcomes, not proving points online. Well, physicians I work with trust me, and patients are grateful to feel healthier, rebuild confidence, and move beyond years of low-carb messaging. Many arrive micronutrient deficient and leave stronger with lasting results. And then she added more. And carbohydrates are essential for building muscle mass. Muscle growth only responds to insulin activation on muscle receptor sites to allow not only protein into a muscular cell, Also, the ADA has not guidelines on what is appropriate carbohydrate recommendations. I have a patient with, on and on and on. I have a patient with CKD2 on 60% carbohydrate, 15% protein. Okay, so she goes into this anecdote, which is
chronic kidney disease,
stage 2, which is, again, everybody's complaining about not using anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
Physicians, imagine if a patient with CKD2 listened to this messaging. Physicians have an oath to do no harm. This is why collaboration with dietitians is critical. We are not the enemy this post frames us to be. This also reminds me, back to that strength, before you jump in here, that reminds me of this strength training comparison I had, and it was from Mark Ripto, who was, again, I don't agree with him on everything, but it really is a funny clip where he says, it's back to this, my work focuses on this, the results are consistent, improved A1Cs, and all this gets better. And Mark's comparison was, if you have somebody who's never worked out in their life, and they ride a bike, their bench press is going to go up. Doing anything with intention is going to make things better, at least at the beginning. That doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything right, other than doing something with intention, because you're starting from zero.
Doing something.
That's what I think.
Consistency is.
Yes, exactly.
Is great. Yeah.
But yeah, so there's another kind of similar comment based on what we were talking about with patients that are working with patients one-on-one, and it's all in a broader fabric of life and blah blah blah.
None of this is necessarily meant to be threatening. It's just my perspective on people who have weight problems. Now, somebody mentioned, doctors hiding behind the power of their degree or something, and I would say,
my man, you have RD in your name. What are you doing?
Right. There is a component to what we do in the obesity medicine world or medical weight loss world that is going to attract a group of patients who have already struggled through what the rest of non-MD types have to offer, right? They've been, it's one of the things we ask when people come in. What other weight loss strategies have you used? And they very often, sometimes people will say, none, I just decided it's time to do this. But most of them will have 5 or 6 things, that they list. And some of them are proprietary, some of them nutritionist, dietitian, Weight Watchers, various things. And the power of the MD, number one, is to kind of have a really solid starting point. Like, okay, we're going to do this set of lab work before we even start. Before you ever see me, we're going to get this, because we want to know what your metabolic state is before we start. And then 3 months, 6 months in, sometimes more frequently, depending on what the situation is, we're measuring this. Chronic kidney disease, for example, is one of them. Somebody's got kidney issues, we watch that. And track it, and universally it gets better. In 20 years, I haven't seen anybody whose kidney function gets worse because we put them on a low-carb diet. Actually, when I started in obesity, one of the dietitians who was involved with the program, she actually invited me to be the medical director for the program. Said, yeah, ketosis is really hard on kidneys, so I started tracking that, and I actually dove back into 5 years of their data. And they'd never had a person with kidney problems as a result of what was then just a shake diet, basically, very low calorie diet, 800 calories a day, low fat. And I looked at that, they were doing blood work all the time. It was very expensive. And I just looked at all the data, 5 years, hundreds and hundreds of patients, and they never had a kidney problem from that. So, and I haven't seen a kidney problem from our program either. And in 20 years, I've never had a patient have their gallbladder out. If you go adequate amounts of fat and protein and keep the carbs down, it doesn't cause gallbladder disease. You go a very low calorie diet with protein and carbs and less fat, which is really, fat has a lot of energy in it. So if you go, it's reasonable to think, gee, if we just cut out the fat, then we get rid of all the calories. But you also get rid of all the need to empty your gallbladder, which causes stasis and stones and gallbladder surgeries. And some of those shake programs have 30% gallbladder removals as a result of the program. Well, that's becomes suddenly a very expensive program.
Maybe just to what you were saying about keeping the carbs down, I think there's something to be addressed here, given what a couple different topics that we've talked about, where people read something like this that you put out there. Obesity is primarily driven by excess carbohydrate consumption. There's all these problems with carbohydrates biochemically. We should really be more attuned to the detrimental effects of carbohydrate. And it's interpreted as you are advocating that you should never eat carbohydrates. It's terrible. If you eat carbohydrates, you're
gonna die.
You're screwed.
Right.
Yeah. And we addressed this a little bit with another conversation we had. I think that'll be coming out soon about this 2-week reset, or I guess that was in our last episode, the 2-week reset of the carnivore challenge. That it doesn't necessarily, and for many people, it's not a forever lifestyle thing to never have another carb in your life. I mean, let's be honest, that's just not realistic. There is more to life than keeping your weight at the perfect number, to an extent. Birthdays and Christmas and, people want to enjoy their life. And so maybe just address that aspect of, once you get people to a healthy weight or a place where it's, they're not on the road to diabetes or early death or heart attack or whatever, there is room to introduce carbs back into their lives and their diet in a way that's healthy, and there's a good relationship, and there's really just a different relationship to the carbohydrate, and there's just a different awareness of how it's going to make you feel, and maybe this is why you feel this way when you eat this particular thing, and they're kind of their life around food changes, I would say, for the better, and you just have a better knowledge of yourself. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
This gets back to the complexity of things, but people in their nature, right, the way God designed us, will respond to, and this is basic psychology, but basically people do more of the thing they get rewarded for, right? If you subsidize something, you're going to get more of it. So if you reward certain behaviors, people, cats, dogs, I mean, we all will like, yay, oh, I get that thing if I do this. So one of the things that plays into the low carb approach is if you understand that my basic premise, which is, and in the absence of anybody proving me wrong on this, glucose is the only carbohydrate that's used for energy in the system. It gets converted to maybe something else, and other things get converted to it. But no other carbohydrate is used for energy in the body in an obligatory fashion, right? That can't be replaced by ketone bodies or fat breakdown products, which is what ketone bodies are. So if you can get people to get a reward for a thing, they'll do more of that. All right, so it's really easy to talk about. Here's a very simple approach. It's going to lower your carbs down. Maybe not get rid of all of them, but down to a reasonable level that you would expect to lose weight. Okay, they start doing this. And by golly, in the first month, they've lost, X% of their body weight, like more than they've ever lost on any other program. The simplicity of it is it's just a winner. Like, oh, well, that was easy. I'll do that again. I'll do that again. Month after month after month. And we see them every month while they're losing weight. We see them as the physician or, PANP, but prescriber, the clinician is seeing them. And we can adjust medications and various things. But bottom line is they'll do more of what gets them rewards. And why weight loss has seemed to be such a struggle for a lot of people is because the complexity of trying to manage it. And when you can give them a very simple message, here it is, eat this, eat this. And there are lists of food, right? I mean, there's over 1 million combinations of meat, low-carb vegetables, and greens. You can make 1 million different combinations of those things on our eating strategy. So, but with it, so that's complex enough, right? I mean, but here's the lists of things. There's 3 lists. You can have all you want from this list, and these you can have in any combination you want, but you got to keep the amount down. And then people get tremendous reward. They see their weight go down. Not only do they see their weight go down, but they just feel a ton better. And so they'll do this, and then and many of them will do it for a long time. Some of them need no appetite suppressing medication whatsoever, no GLP-1s, no phentermine, no topiramate, no nothing. But a lot of them will use it, and then we can taper those off as they feel comfortable. But once they get to what they consider to be their goal weight, or what they consider a healthy weight, and we don't tell them how much weight they have to lose. This is their health, it's their story, and so on. Some people will set a goal for themselves.
They're choosing to be there and doing what they want to do. It means their lives, their health.
They knock down the gate they wanted to knock down, and they'll realize, well, that was so easy. I'm going to go for the next 20 pounds or whatever the number is.
Yeah.
And so they just keep doing it, and they feel great. They feel great. They feel great. And at some point, they come to, gee, this is about all the weight I really want to lose. Some people will say, oh, my wife thinks I look too skinny, or, I mean, there's various reasons, and it's all fine. I mean, this is the thing people have to realize. This is not a public health initiative. This is not, population health. This is one person trying to achieve their health goals, and we respect that. So we help you get to where you want to get, and we give you the data and the feedback, and we can show you the labs and the, your body fat percentage, your pounds of excess body fat. We can show you all that stuff. And we've been doing this for at least 15 years this way. Not as much detail prior to that, but either way, it's the same basic process. Lots of data, thousands and thousands of patients, and most of them do really well. You get to the point of, okay, what you were talking about, which is, okay, now we're going to talk about I've hit my goal weight.
Now what?
Then we have the conversation again. It's patient-centered conversation about, well, what does that mean for you? Okay, we try to get people to go a little past their long-term, what they consider to be the weight they want to maintain, because as soon as they reintroduce carbs, they're going to put a few pounds back on, if only in water weight, right? So we have them do a little overshoot, 5 pounds, maybe 10. And then we say, okay, great job. Now, what's the stuff you feel like you've been missing out on? What do you really wish you could have a little bit of? And let's see how sensitive you are to amounts of that. And we may start, and very often it's things like berries, blueberries, strawberries. I've missed those. And so we'll say, okay, sprinkle in, a third of a cup or a half a cup a day of those things. And then just get on the scale and do a dry weight every morning and see what happens with your weight. See how you feel. And then, if that's going well, then try a different one the next week, and so on and so forth. And it's an N=1 study. Crossover study, really. You've been doing this, and now you're going to do that. And the same person responds differently, or they don't. If they're eating low enough amounts of things and their weight stays down and they feel great, then hooray. But then you start doing little combinations of things, and we never encourage people to go back to concentrated sugars or ultra-processed starches and sugars and things like that.
Yeah, Cheetos and smashing cookies and yeah.
And I'll have people who go on vacation. Oh, I was off plan for 2 weeks. Tell me about that. Well, and it'll come back to their recent patient was in Alaska for 2 weeks. How'd that go? Well, it was a bit of a struggle. Did a lot of driving, eating out, and so on. But they'll have very specific instances, they'll quote me, where they were off plan, where they had a little bit of this or a little bit of that. I said, but it's not anything like before you changed your metabolism through a low-carb diet, is it? They're like, oh, God, no. I would never eat that much of that stuff again. because they just know how lousy it makes them feel. So they sneak a little, piece of sourdough bread, or, in Alaska, it might be a sourdough pancake, something. But the point is, they just know the toxicity of these various things. And so they just never, they might over time, if they get off the program and we don't see them for years, kind of slide back into that lifestyle. But by the time people have gotten to their goal weight, they've been working with us for months, if not years, some of them. And they just know the price to be paid if they go back to those toxic foodstuffs. And they've figured out what they can do, and they feel really great. They love if they wouldn't get to their goal weight if they hadn't figured out something that just really works for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it gets back to that awareness where it's like you have a whole different understanding of how your body works and what you eat, how it makes you feel, what it does to you. It just that kind of, it all flows down from that, like you said. They were just aware, like, oh, I had a little bit, but nothing like I used to have, and I felt this way versus,
And we'll get people who come back to us. We haven't seen them in a few years, and they'll come back and they've regained some weight, but they never regain all of it. Never. They're like, I got packed, I put on 30 pounds of the 80 that they lost previously. They're like, okay, I need some help getting back on track, and let's disrupt this. And they know what they did before worked. And so they come back in and go, okay, help me do this again. And the psychological piece of it is sometimes you're just being accountable to somebody helps. I'm going to get on this body composition analyzer and it's going to show me numbers I don't really want to see, but I got to see them because I'm not doing well on my own here. So, but they know what the problem is. They just need somebody to help them kind of break that cycle of.
And to your point, the other thing that I think is part of this conversation, or that people are mentioning, is there's obviously many methods or protocols or theories of losing weight. You can count calories and do this, what this person was saying,
right.
Like 60% carbohydrate and lose weight. Low carb is a tool,
right?
I guess you could say it's a tool set that you have used extensively and you believe in. There's all these reasons that we talked about, but there's just a level of complexity to, like, if you count calories, that
right.
used to be, it still is a thing, but used to be the real big thing, right? Count your calories. That, if anybody listening has tried to do that, it is incredibly mentally taxing to count
day
calories.
After day after day, meal after meal, snack after snack.
Yeah, it's not even day. It's literally like, it feels like every hour.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, how many calories is this? How many calories is that? And that's not to say it doesn't work, because for those,
it can work.
Right. It can work. There's, especially the fitness obsessed people, people who kind of make it a lifestyle, which a lot of people don't want to do that. They know kind of how many calories. You don't really know because it's the packet, things, the healthiest things in the world don't have any packaging on them. So you're just making guesses, but you kind of get over time, over years and years and years, you kind of have an idea. But that approach is just, it sounds like hell to most people.
Yeah, right.
And that's one of the reasons it doesn't work. It's like a compliance thing.
You're going to purgatory. What's that mean? It means I got to count every calorie of everything I eat for the rest of my temporal existence.
Yes. And that, I think I'm not sure how to exactly bridge the gap kind of in a conversational way, but just that's one of the things I notice about people being like, well, it's calories in versus calories out, and that's what matters. And again, it's like spreadsheet brain versus real life person brain. It's like we're not spreadsheets and we're not robots that can just count calories. It's just not realistic in a lot of ways, and that's why, to your point, you don't use something like, for one of the many reasons why you don't use like a calorie counting method, is it just doesn't work that well. It doesn't feel good. It's a huge burden in a lot of ways.
Well, and it's just not natural, right? Eating intuitively, eating naturally.
Intuitive eating. Have you heard of that?
Yeah,
as kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
intuitive eating.
We're just rebranding what is normal.
But you have to give people permission to eat the right stuff. And there's 60 years of confusion out there. I hear it every day still in my primary care family practice patients. concerns about too much red meat, eating too much fat, not getting enough fiber, and so on. And so they get confused, sidetracked, overthink things. If you think, again, I will say intuitive eating is 100,000 years ago, we Homo sapiens sapiens existed as a species on this planet. What was there? There wasn't any society. There was no civilization. People probably weren't even staying in the same place, for more than a few days at a time or weeks at a time, because they moved where the food was. Well, how did the food move? It had legs or wings or fins or whale or seals or whatever the population is you want to talk about. If you sat in one place and waited for some random group of plants to grow, during that season, and you didn't have some other protein source and frankly fat source, you were dead, right? So we evolved and did very, very well as the human species based on a nomadic, basically animal product lifestyle. And we have not evolved really since then, because we kind of became more or less the apex predator in the sense that nothing was really preying on us too much. Maybe a saber-toothed tiger or something, but we were smart enough to learn how to kill those and defend ourselves. And big enough and strong enough and with enough energy and organization and so on, our brains were getting bigger and bigger. That doesn't happen on a low-fat, plant-based diet. You got to have a lot of energy, a lot of protein, a lot of fat, and that just doesn't come from plants. So intuitively, and then you ask other people, and over the years, if you ask people, and my own experience, you keep eating until you've had enough protein, because that's the thing that produces satiety. Does spinach produce satiety? Yeah, if you eat a pound of it, you can get full. But the thing that most economically, from a time and energy expenditure standpoint, it's a protein-rich, frankly, meat, fish, poultry, something like that, that will land, and then you can go for hours without feeling like eating again. And these people who are the calorie counters, they're eating what some of my patients refer to as bird food or rabbit food, which never really fills them up. So an hour later, they're looking for something else low calorie to eat, and they're never really eating the thing that really fills them up, or enough of the thing that really fills them up, because they're too concerned about the calories, right? And they're all balled up about energy intake, and it's just so complicated, and it hasn't worked. I mean, we've got an 75%, 80% overweight and obesity problem in this country. Anybody trained in that old way of thinking who continues to talk about it without at least acknowledging that there might be something else here, I think is it's missing the point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I hate. I can't stand about the calorie thing is there's always this, I'm always looking for the lowest calorie option. It's like,
right.
That is going to lead you down a very dark road.
Oh, yeah. And dark and unsustainable. You want to talk about sustainability. If you're hungry all the time, there's no way you're going to keep doing that. You won't have the mental energy to count the calories because you'll be so focused on, the starvation that you're feeling. And people hate that. That's the reason they don't do certain diets. Like I was hungry all the time. Right. And speaking of, this is kind of a tangent, but speaking of epidemiological or observational studies, things that are associations aren't necessarily causality. And I see this from time to time, and our dietitian friends will probably hate me for this, but I'll say it. I've never seen any data that shows that eating fiber leads to any meaningful health outcomes. Meaningful.
A causal link, that is.
Yeah, causal link. reduction in colon cancer, reduction in heart disease. I mean,
Again,
those are the big
nutrition's very,
claims.
very difficult.
Right.
It's very difficult to make those sorts of claims, and that is true. I mean, this is open debate of like, is fiber really just, is the primary benefit of fiber actually just the satiation that you feel, which leads to a lower caloric intake, which is just, keeps you in a healthier body weight, blah, blah, blah. So fiber on its own actually isn't doing anything
other than making you feel full.
other than right. And so I've seen that, and again, I'm not claiming I.
And again, I mean, if that's how you use it and that's what you're thinking and that works for you, great. But to people talk about fiber as if there's some kind of almost holy HOLY presence there in the fiber, and everybody has to have it and so on.
And people talk about gut health.
Yeah. Well, I hear that all the time. Yeah. Microbiome. Okay, show me your studies on microbiome health where you have done this thing short of a fecal transplant, which those do happen, and some meaningful outcome study from that.
But again, it's almost like you're kind of like getting sunk into the quagmire of like, you're almost in this like optimal state. If you're dealing with somebody who's 100 pounds overweight or an obese BMI, the concern about their microbiome and their lower intestine is not as high priority.
Well, some arguments are that it's because the microbiome is out of balance, or there's the wrong mix, let's say, of bacteria in your gut that causes obesity. Now, I would say, until somebody can prove that out with the randomized controlled trial, why don't we look at it from the other perspective and say the gut bacteria are all disturbed because you've been feeding it such a high percentage of food stuff, that is carbohydrate, that the system never was ever designed to process. Right? And so and what does that manifest like? Well, it can be diarrhea, it can be irritable bowel, bloating, gas, things like that. Think lactose intolerance. To my friends in the dairy industry, you'll hate this, but I'll just say it. We're not designed to digest lactose past about a year and a half of age, right? And we were supposed to be getting that from our mother's milk. So all the lactose we get after that is really kind of hit or miss as to whether or not we digest that very well at all. And if we don't, the bacteria in our guts will, and that's where you get the gas and the bloating and so on.
I noted something down here that we were saying before, that the reference to kind of primal eating styles and habits and what we were eating many years ago. It's also important to keep in mind that food abundance, having to make a choice about what to eat, is a very new idea.
Yeah, geologically or evolutionarily speaking.
Yeah, or even just civilizationally. I mean, even 150 years ago, people didn't really have a choice about what they ate. They ate what was available to them without really regard for optimal health, because there just wasn't the what was optimal for people was so low on the list of priorities, when starving was a much higher likelihood than I mean, even that's true today in many countries around the world, is just getting enough calories on a day-to-day basis is far more important to their health and well-being than the optimal mix of things. All that to say is that the psychology and the decision-making process and the relationship that we have to all of these choices can't be overlooked. And that gets back to what you were saying about working with people one-on-one and understanding things in a broader, over the long term, and taking trips and doing all these things. This is all new as it relates to, the lives of people, which of course is a very, very good thing that we have an abundance of calories and we can choose what to eat and where to go. And you walk into the grocery store and you can pick anything you want.
Yeah, and these days we can choose a job that doesn't require us to bust our hump for 10 hours a day, throwing sacks of feed on the back of a wagon or something, or baling hay or stacking bricks, right? And then you get home and you've ripped through 1,000 calories in physical activity in a day, or more, plus your basal metabolic needs, and you really have to replace that energy with something, right? And if you look at the average, again, body build 100 years ago, and I mean, just looking at photos, right? But I mean, we just are bigger people. We're taller. We're just larger because we've had an abundance of energy consumption all of our lives. There's more to build with. And people were smaller, shorter, skinnier. They were all thin. And I mean, that really wasn't till, I'm going to say, the 70s and the 80s when you started seeing people really getting larger. Because, I mean, yeah. And then you have to look at socially, what happened in those times and what are the things that made all the difference in that. So subsidizing sugar, subsidizing fructose production. I mean, there's just things you can point to and go, it's far more likely that just one thing changed that created all of this than it is that 100 different little factors kind of played their little part, and now we have this, right? And in my opinion, so if you can look back on those things, and you just kind of, it comes back to, as often they do, I think it's a few just kind of maybe well-intentioned but misguided government policies, and the next thing you know, we got this explosion. And it serves some well to make it more complex, but it doesn't serve the patient. And my patients are who I'm treating. So I have to go with the simple and effective and really quite inexpensive approach, which is just get your carbs down.
Well, we've been going for a little while, so I think we'll do one more comment here and then we'll wrap if that works.
Sure.
This is the last one. This is a guy who's actually a wastewater process manager. So he's not in dietitian, or he's not a dietitian, but he makes a really good point actually in the first half of this comment. He says, I tried a strict carnivore diet for about 6 months and concluded it cannot be the ideal human diet, nor the diet upon which our ancestors thrived. How did I come to this? Hydration and electrolyte requirements. Despite supplementing, I feel constantly dehydrated, and water alone did not feel hydrating. Unlike now, electrolytes were historically rare and very expensive when available. The glucose metabolism, electrolyte sparing, and superior for hydration. Oh, is electrolyte sparing and superior for hydration. And then he says, with respect to people feeling better after cutting out carbs, I think it's important to distinguish high carbs from da-da-da. I'm sure people feel better after cutting out processed garbage. I think people also want to defend whatever new thing is they're doing and hope that they will make some positive difference. Da-da-da. So mixed reviews of that comment, but the hydration thing is actually quite interesting because this is something people report being on low carb versus high carb diets. What's been your experience with that in reference to what he's talking about?
Yeah, insulin has an effect on the kidney that causes you to retain sodium and water. And so when you go on a low carb diet, that effect is minimized. And so particularly when you first get started, then you start dumping a lot of water. Electrolytes, a lot of the electrolytes that, this is one of the things, if you're on a strict carnivore diet, ancestrally speaking, or intuitive eating, but ancestrally speaking, ancestral eating, people ate everything, right? These days it's, I'll just have a piece of steak. But back in those days, they would, probably gnaw on the bones and suck out the bone marrow and eat all the fat, eat all the organs. And so at the very least, I would tell people that if you're cooking up whatever your meat, fish, whatever it is, capture the drippings from those, because there's electrolytes and micronutrients in those liquids. Bone broth, for example. What's that? Well, that's that's a thing, and people use that, and that will capture magnesium, potassium, and so on. So that is a little weird for people in the sense of they're not used to doing that, but they're also not used to not eating carbs, so they can kind of adjust. But over the years, again, I'm not a big proponent of a long-term carnivore diet just because I think it's hard for most people, right? Do I think it's possible? Yes, I think so. But then you have to eat like a carnivore, which is eat the whole critter. And so you have to be kind of cognizant of that rather than just eating a ribeye. You kind of have to be sure you're getting other parts of the animal in there as well. But so that's what I would say about that. It is pretty well known that when you switch to lower carb diet, though, there will be a diuresis, and that's why people like to say, "Oh, you're just losing a bunch of water weight." Well, that's true, but I wouldn't minimize the benefit that potentially recognizes or represents, because that's the first step to improving blood pressure, is to reduce the sodium retention on the kidney. I mean, we use water pills to treat high blood pressure. What does it do? It causes your kidneys to lose salt and water. So it's a good natural effect for lowering blood pressure.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that was actually a good comment. I thought that was interesting that he pointed that out. Bringing some at least anecdotal talk to the table.
Right.
Well, this was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Great pod. Great pod.
I think so too. They're all fun.
Yeah. And there's so much more to talk about, and we'll get into some of the things other people mentioned on this, because people have, again, like we said, everybody has opinions, and there's a lot of topics to cover.
Right.
Including GLP-1s, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the very near future. Thanks for listening to The Treatment Plan. If you enjoyed the conversation, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And if someone comes to mind who'd like this show, tell them about it or send it their way using the share button.